Chapter 1: Meeting in the Snow. London winter. Snow fell heavily like a chilling white curtain covering the ancient streets, transforming the city into a picture both beautiful and cold. Along the banks of the Thames, lights from skyscrapers danced on the thin layer of ice covering the water, reflecting faint golden streaks, as if the city were trying to cling to a bit of warmth amidst the biting cold. The wind howled through narrow alleys, swirling snowflakes in spirals, carrying the frigid breath of winter that seeped into every crevice of clothing. On that freezing night, while most of London huddled in warm apartments or sought solace in crowded pubs, the small cafe called the Hearth shone like a beacon amid the snowy veil, a place tucked away on a narrow street near the headquarters of Evergreen Biotech, its soft golden light spilling from the windows, beckoning the lost. Inside the Hearth, the atmosphere was warm, like a gentle embrace, a stark contrast to the cold outside. The fire crackled in an old hearth, the aroma of roasted coffee mingled with the faint scent of gingerbread wafting from the oven behind the counter, and the humming of Clara Wren rose above it all. "Silent night, holy night." Her voice was clear and unusually warm, though interrupted by the clinking sound of a spoon dropping to the wooden floor, for the third time that night. Clara Wren, 25 years old, was a petite girl with tousled blonde hair tied loosely as if she just stepped out of a daydream, her bright green eyes gleaming like a small flame in the snowy haze, and a frayed, faded sweater hugging her slender frame. She picked up the spoon, laughing loudly to herself, her laughter echoing in the small space. "Life's a series of disasters, but I still love it, and I sing pretty well too, don't I?" No one answered, but Clara didn't need them to. Talking to herself was a habit, a way to keep her heart warm, even though life hadn't always been kind to her. Growing up in an orphanage on the outskirts of London, Clara had learned to love others to fill the void in her heart, the longing to be loved that she hid behind a sharp smile and unexpected jokes. She wasn't the type to indulge in grandiose fantasies. Working at the Hearth, she earned every penny to nurture a small dream of building an orphanage where abandoned children could find shelter. "Every customer who comes in here gets a bit of warmth for free. Call it charity," she often declared, her hands deftly wiping the counter, though she just dropped another cup onto the tray, water splashing onto the old wooden floor. She shrugged, picking it up with a quick motion. "Adds a little drama for fun. Who cares? Customers like me because I'm adorably clumsy." But deep within her burned a fire, a fierce longing to be loved, to be needed, to be held tightly on those cold winter days she'd once endured alone, curled up under a thin blanket in the orphanage. That night, as Clara busied herself brewing coffee for a regular, an old man who always sat in the corner with a cold cup of tea, the door of the Hearth swung open, bringing with it a gust of icy wind sharp as a knife, making the fire in the hearth flicker. Clara looked up, her green eyes sparkling with curiosity, and then she saw him, Julian Ashford. He stepped inside, his tall figure like a statue of ice in the warm space of the cafe, snowflakes clinging to his slightly tousled dark brown hair and the shoulders of his perfectly tailored black suit jacket. His gray eyes were cold as an iceberg drifting in the North Sea, sharp as if they could pierce through anything, even Clara's racing heart, though she hadn't yet realized it. He was the CEO of Evergreen Biotech, a man who held a biotech empire worth billions of pounds in his grasp, a name all of London knew from headlines about his ruthless success and unrelenting coldness. But tonight, his face was taut like a string about to snap, his lips pressed into a tight line, and his gaze carried a storm no one dared to face. Julian had just left an urgent meeting at Evergreen Biotech headquarters, just a few blocks from the Hearth. The board of directors had issued an uncompromising ultimatum, the chairman's voice echoing in his mind like a curse. "Marry within a month, Julian, or we'll replace you. The drug trial scandal is killing our stock, and you're the one who has to pay." Scandal, a word he despised but couldn't deny. A tissue regeneration drug developed by Evergreen had been hit with leaked misinformation, accused of causing dangerous side effects. The press pounced like vultures. The stock plummeted. They were questioning whether the young CEO had enough capability to lead, and the board demanded he stabilize his image. A fancy way of saying he needed to marry someone to turn himself into a dependable family man in the public's eyes. Julian didn't believe in love, never had, and perhaps never would. To him, it was a vague, extravagant notion he'd buried since that freezing winter day when he was 10, when his father left him standing under a street lamp in a blizzard to chase after a lavish party. He'd stood there, hands purple from the cold, breath turning to white mist, waiting for someone who never returned, a memory he'd locked away in a cage of ice along with his heart. Since then, he lived to control his company, his life, everything, and no one, nothing, could break through that ice. He scanned the cafe, his gaze settling on Clara as she fumbled with the coffee, humming as if the whole world were a comedy stage. "One espresso," he said, his voice dry as ice cracking on a lake. "Hurry up." Clara turned, nearly dropping the cup but catching it with a swift motion, looking at him with a radiant smile. "Sorry about that. Drink my coffee. It'll warm you right up. I'm not great with speed, but I'm good at making people laugh." Julian frowned, intending to brush off her joke, but the warmth in her voice, the way she laughed as if the world were a game, caught him off guard. A strange sensation, like a hint of warmth seeping into his icy chest. She brought the coffee over, setting it on the table with a beaming smile. "Careful, it's hot. I put my whole heart into it." A tiny drop splashed onto his hand, and before he could react, Clara quickly wiped it with a cloth, her voice warm with a touch of humor. "Oops, I'm such a klutz, but you're okay, right? I don't want you suing me, though I could make it up with a smile so we'd be even." Julian meant to pull his hand away, lips pressed tight to maintain his cold demeanor, but the warmth of her fingers, the way she looked at him with those sparkling green eyes, made him pause. His heart, which he thought was frozen forever, skipped a beat, something that hadn't happened in his 32 years of life. Clara didn't notice. She turned back to the counter, resuming her humming, but Julian's eyes stayed fixed on her, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. He sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around the hot coffee cup, the warmth spreading through his palms but not enough to thaw the cold inside him. Outside, the snow fell relentlessly, the wind howling through the fogged windows. But inside the hearth, an invisible flame had been kindled, a flame Julian didn't yet know would soon consume him. He took a sip of the coffee, the bitterness flooding his tongue, and a thought crossed his mind. Crazy but impossible to dismiss. She could be the solution. He set the cup down, his cold gray eyes gazing out the window where the blizzard raged on. The pressure from the board weighed heavily on his shoulders. Scandal, stocks, ultimatum. He needed a wife, a perfect image to save Evergreen Biotech, and Clara Wren, the coffee girl with the radiant smile and unexpected humor, was an ideal choice. She didn't belong to his world, had no power, no ambition, no threat. A simple deal, he told himself, but deep inside a sense of unease was growing. A premonition that she wasn't just a solution, but something greater he couldn't control. Julian stood, stepping outside, his breath turning to white mist in the frigid air. But then he stopped, turning back to look through the fogged glass of the hearth. Clara was wiping the counter, singing Silent Night again, and in that moment, he knew he couldn't leave without acting. He pushed the door open once more, his cold gray eyes locking onto her. "You," he said, voice deep and dry, "be my wife. £500,000 to fund scholarships for orphans. Do you agree?" Clara looked up, dropping the spoon to the floor again, but this time she didn't pick it up right away. She stared at him, green eyes wide, then burst into loud laughter, her laugh echoing through the small space. "Are you serious? Oh my God, I thought you were going to demand a refund for that coffee splash." She tilted her head, sizing him up from head to toe, then gave a mischievous smile. "All right, but I'll warn you, I'm not good at keeping my distance, and I love a bit too much. Can you handle that?" Julian nodded, lips pressed tight, thinking it was just a simple deal. Nothing more, nothing less. But he had no idea that Clara Wren, with her warm smile and burning heart, would soon set ablaze the cold world he'd built over all those years. Welcome to Soul Stories. Life can be overwhelming, But here we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a "I am happy" in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter together. Chapter 2. The Cold Wedding. The sky was gray, heavy like a leaden blanket, as snow fell silently onto the suburban fields where Ashford Manor stood imposingly amid the white expanse. The ancient building, with its stone walls covered in green moss, steeply pitched roof stained by time, and tall windows etched with old patterns, had once been home to generations of the Ashford family. But now it was merely a cold shell, a memory of winter days no one spoke of, where laughter had been replaced by a heavy silence. Today, the manor was chosen as the site for a discreet ceremony, an event that none of the few invited guests dared to comfortably call a wedding. There were no vibrant fresh flowers on the altar, no lively music from a violin ensemble, just the sound of the wind whistling through the windows and the dim light from old crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling of the grand living room, swaying faintly as if trembling in the cold. Julian stood before a large mirror in the dressing room, his hands adjusting his black tie with the cold precision of a machine. The black suit he wore was perfectly tailored, fitting his tall frame snugly, but it couldn't hide the tension etched across his face, his lips pressed into a tight line, his gray eyes sweeping over his reflection as if sizing up an opponent. He didn't want this. Marriage, a word he'd always considered foreign, a concept he'd dismissed since the day his father left him, standing under a street lamp in a blizzard at age 10. Hands purple from the cold, waiting for someone who never returned. But the board of directors at Evergreen Biotech gave him no choice. "You need a wife, Julian?" the chairman's voice echoed in his mind, dry and uncompromising. "To quash the scandal, to save the stock, or we'll find someone to replace you." The drug trial scandal, a blemish he hadn't caused but had to pay for. A tissue regeneration drug, Evergreen's Hope, had been hit with leaked misinformation, accused of causing dangerous side effects. The press pounced, stocks plummeted, and now here he was, preparing to marry a girl he'd met only once. Clara Wren, the coffee maker from the hearth, whom he'd chosen because she didn't belong to his world, had no power, no ambition, no threat. A perfect solution, he told himself, but deep inside, an unease was growing, a premonition that she wasn't just a transaction, but something he couldn't control. The heavy doors of the grand living room swung open, and Clara Wren stepped in, bringing with her a gust of cold air from the long, stone-tiled hallway. She wore a simple white dress, not the lavish wedding gown Julian's PR team had prepared, but one she'd picked herself from a small shop near the hearth, its thin, light fabric hugging her petite figure. Worn brown boots peeked out from under the hem, a mark of the simple life she had no intention of hiding. Her tousled blonde hair was loosely tied, a few strands falling across her face, and her green eyes shone brightly like a small flame in the manor's cold expanse. She walked with a confidence tinged with endearing clumsiness, nearly tripping over the red carpet stretched across the floor, but quickly regaining her balance, laughing loudly. "Oh my gosh, I almost fell and became the ugliest bride in history. Good thing the floor isn't as handsome as you. I wouldn't mind." Her laughter rang out, clear and warm, like a spring breeze lost in winter, causing a few nearby board members to pause, their eyes flickering with surprise. Julian turned, his cold gray eyes sweeping over her, but the corner of his mouth twitched, a reaction he couldn't suppress at her joke. Clara wasn't like the women he'd met in high society, those who were always poised, calculating, and distant. She was a gust of wind, free, unpredictable, and full of life. "You're late," he said, his voice dry, trying to maintain his cold demeanor. "The ceremony started 10 minutes ago." He turned away, walking toward the small altar set up in the middle of the room, where an officiant stood ready with a marriage registry book in hand, his stern gaze more suited to presiding over a trial than a wedding. Clara shrugged, stepping closer to him with a radiant smile. What can I do? I had to run from the bus stop because your driver said, "You don't look like a bride." I told him straight, "That's right, I'm more like someone bringing a bit of warmth. Don't worry, I don't charge for it." She stopped in front of him, just a few steps away, her green eyes meeting his without a hint of hesitation. Relax a little. You're tense like you're about to face a shareholders meeting. This is a wedding. At least pretend to be happy. Her voice was warm but carried a playful edge, as if she knew full well he didn't want this, but was still trying to pull him out of his icy shell. Julian frowned, intending to reply with something curt, but her eyes, bright, warm, and fearless, made him pause. He turned to the officiant, nodding to begin. Only a handful of board members and a small group of reporters were present. Those who needed to witness the stable image Julian was forced to create. No friends, no family, just a heavy silence in the prying eyes of strangers. The officiant started reading the vows, his voice monotonous like an old hymn. Julian Ashford, do you take Clara Wren to be your lawful wife? Julian cut him off, his tone icy. I do. He didn't look at Clara, his gaze fixed on the empty space ahead, as if this were just a deal to finalize quickly. The officiant turned to Clara. Clara Wren, do you take Julian Ashford to be your lawful husband? Clara laughed loudly, interrupting him. Hold on, let me check if he's really handsome first. She tilted her head, eyeing Julian from head to toe, then nodded. Yep, he's handsome. I do. But if he can't handle me, I'm not responsible, okay? Her laughter echoed, breaking the tense atmosphere, causing a few reporters to chuckle before masking it with coughs. Julian turned to her, his cold gray eyes flickering with a hint of confusion. But he said nothing, his lips pressed tighter, as if struggling to hold on to the control slipping from his grasp. The officiant presented the rings, 2 simple silver bands, plain with no patterns or gems, just as Julian had requested to keep things minimal. He took one, reaching for Clara's hand, but she thrust hers forward too quickly, nearly causing the ring to drop. Clara yelped, "Oh my gosh, if that ring falls, I'll end up marrying the table. Good thing you're better looking than it." She deftly grabbed his hand, steadying the ring, beaming. See? I'm quick. I won't let you slip away. Julian felt her small hand touch his, warm, soft, the complete opposite of the coldness in his own fingers. A jolt ran through him, making his heart skip a beat, a sensation he hadn't expected and didn't want to acknowledge. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his movement swift like signing a contract, but his eyes inadvertently met hers, those green eyes sparkling like dancing flames. Clara whispered, her voice warm and teasing. I love a little too much. Can you handle it, or are you going to run off? Julian ignored her, pulling his hand back, but her warmth lingered on his skin, an indelible mark. The officiant declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife. There was no applause, just a few camera flashes from the reporters. Julian turned to leave the room, but Clara grabbed his hand, her tone playful. Wait a sec, husband. No kiss? I'm not going to be a bride without one. Julian froze, his cold gray eyes meeting hers, but before he could respond, she stood on tiptoe and planted a quick, warm kiss on his cheek. Swift, tender, and surprising. There, I went first. If you don't return it, I'll tell the press. She laughed, winking. Julian felt the warmth of her lips on his cheek, his heart beating harder, but he masked it with his cold facade. That's enough. Let's go. He led her to the car, a sleek black Bentley waiting in the courtyard. They left the manor in silence, the car gliding through snow-covered fields towards central London. Their destination was Julian's penthouse by the Thames, a luxurious but frigid space, its large glass walls reflecting the hazy lights on the frozen river. As they stepped inside, the vast room unfolded before Clara. Polished marble floors, minimalist steel and glass furniture. Not a trace of warmth, like a museum rather than a home. Julian pointed to a small room in the corner. Your room's there. Keep your distance. This is just a deal. Clara paused, her green eyes glinting as she looked at him, then stepped forward, grabbing his hand with unexpected strength. You think I'm the type of wife who stands back and stares? No way, I'm not good at keeping distance, and I want to be close so you can understand me better. Before he could react, she stood on tiptoe again, but this time it wasn't a cheek kiss. Her lips met his, a fierce kiss like a blazing fire, sweet and full of passion. Julian stood stunned, his gray eyes widening for a moment, but then he couldn't hold back, his arms wrapped tightly around her, returning the kiss with a force he hadn't known he possessed. Clara's warmth spread to him, burning through the ice he'd so carefully built, and in that instant, he knew he'd stepped into something he couldn't control. They parted, their breaths ragged, mingling in the penthouse's cold air. Clara laughed, her voice warm but teasing. See? I told you, I love a little too much, and you just kiss me back. Julian didn't respond, his cold gray eyes fixed on her, but deep inside a fire had sparked, a flame he couldn't extinguish, no matter how hard he tried. Chapter 3. A Night of Passion. Winter enveloped London in a frigid night, and Julian Ashford's penthouse by the Thames stood silently amid the snowy expanse. The large glass walls surrounding the apartment reflected the hazy lights from the frozen river, casting dancing streaks of golden light across the polished marble floor. Outside, the wind howled through every crevice, carrying a chilling wail like an endless soundtrack. But inside, the space was oppressively silent, a coldness that stemmed not just from the temperature, but from the emptiness of the room itself. The minimalist decor of steel and glass bore no paintings, no rugs, no signs of life, like a museum displaying Julian's solitude rather than a home. But tonight, as the penthouse door closed behind Clara Wren and Julian, a different breeze, a warm, uncontrollable one, slipped into this space. Clara stood in the vast living room, her worn brown boots leaving small melting patches of snow on the floor. The simple white dress she'd worn at the wedding still hugged her petite frame, now slightly wrinkled from the journey back from Ashford Manor. Her tousled blonde hair spilled over her shoulders, and her bright green eyes scanned the room with a mix of curiosity and surprise. "Oh my gosh," she said, her voice breaking the silence. "This place looks like a giant refrigerator. Does anyone actually live here?" She turned to Julian, a radiant smile on her lips, but her eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint, as if challenging his coldness. Julian stood a few steps away, his hands slowly untying his tie, his gray eyes gazing at her without expression. He'd just endured a long day, a tense board meeting, a sham wedding at the manor, and now Clara's unexpected kiss as they entered the penthouse. That kiss, fierce, sweet, and full of passion, lingered on his lips, a warmth he couldn't erase, though he'd tried to maintain his cold demeanor when they parted. "Your room's over there," he said, his voice dry, pointing to a small room in the corner. "Keep your distance. This is just a deal." He turned, intending to walk to the steel bar in the corner to pour a drink, a way to extinguish the small flame smoldering inside him. But Clara wasn't one to comply easily. She stepped forward, her boots clicking lightly on the floor, and before he could move away, she grabbed his hand with surprising strength. "You think I'm the type of wife who stands back and stares?" she said, her voice warm but edged with sharpness. "No way. I'm not good at keeping distance, and I want to be close so you can understand me better." Julian froze, his cold gray eyes locking onto hers. But before he could respond, Clara stood on tiptoe again. Her lips met his, not the gentle peck on the cheek from the wedding, but a fierce kiss, like a fire blazing through a snowstorm, sweet and brimming with passion. Her breath was hot, a stark contrast to the penthouse's chilly air, and her small hand pressed against his chest, as if pulling him into a world he'd never known. Julian stood stunned, his gray eyes widening for a moment, but then something inside him broke. The ice he'd built over years began to melt. He couldn't hold back, his arms wrapped tightly around her, pulling her close, and he returned the kiss with a force he hadn't known he possessed. His lips pressed against hers, no longer the coldness of a transaction, but a hunger he didn't realize he had. They tumbled onto the large sofa in the living room, the lights from the Thames dancing on the glass, illuminating two figures entwined in passion. Clara laughed between gasping breaths, her voice warm with a hint of humor. I live to love, so kissing you has to be all in. Can you handle it? Julian didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. His hand threaded through her tangled blonde hair, drawing her closer, and their kiss deepened, grew more intense, as if they were both searching for something in each other, something they didn't know they'd lost long ago. Clara guided him, not with the clumsiness of an inexperienced girl, but with the skill of a sincere heart, touching him with gentle, meaningful caresses. She unbuttoned his shirt, her hands gliding over his chest, her warmth spreading through every inch of his cold skin. Julian felt his heartbeat quicken, no longer the steady rhythm of a machine, but a vibrant, living pulse, one he'd forgotten long ago. They sank onto the sofa, the light from the Thames streaming through the glass, casting faint golden streaks across her skin. Clara looked up, her green eyes gleaming as she gazed at him, and she smiled, a smile both tender and playful. I'm not good at holding back. If you can't keep up, I'll drag you along. Julian looked at her, his cold gray eyes now flickering with a spark of warmth, and he pulled her back, kissing her again, deeper as if he wanted to melt into her. Their clothes fell to the floor, Clara's white dress, Julian's black suit jacket, like fragments of two different worlds now merging into one. Amid the storm of passion, they paused, their ragged breaths mingling in the penthouse's cold air. Clara lay on his chest, her hand gently tracing over his skin, and she whispered, You're so cold, but I can feel the warmth in you now. Julian stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, but his arm instinctively tightened around her, as if afraid she'd vanish. For the first time in years, he felt something, a connection he couldn't explain. He began, his voice hoarse. When I was 10, my father left me in a blizzard to go to a party. I stood under a street lamp, waiting until my hands turned purple, but he never came back. The words spilled out of him, unintended, as if Clara's kiss had unlocked a door he'd kept shut for years. Clara lifted her head, her green eyes meeting his, free of judgment, filled only with tenderness and a sharp edge in her voice. I once burned bread at the orphanage to warm the kids. It set a corner of the house on fire, but they hugged me and laughed. Love is a fire, Julian. Worth it even if it burns the house down. Let me light it for you, okay? She smiled, her hand brushing his cheek, and the longing for love within her, a fierce flame she never hid, melted him. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead, and for the first time, he felt his heart was no longer a block of ice. It was burning, even if just a small flame. They continued, with no boundaries, no distance. That night, in the cold penthouse by the Thames, Clara and Julian merged in passion, not just physically, but soulfully. She guided him with sincerity, deftly touching wounds he'd never acknowledged, and he responded with an intensity he didn't know he had. When it all subsided, they lay on the sofa, sweat glistening on their skin, their breathing slowing to a steady rhythm. Clara curled up in his arms, whispering, I'm not good at stopping. Are you okay? Julian looked at her, his gray eyes now softer, and he whispered, I'm addicted to your warmth already. Clara laughed, her voice light but meaningful. Good, because I don't know how to stop loving. She rested her head on his chest, and in that moment, Julian felt her heartbeat, strong, alive, and warm, beating in sync with his. Outside, the snow kept falling. The lights from the Thames still danced on the glass. But inside the penthouse, a fire had ignited, a flame Julian couldn't extinguish, and for the first time, he didn't want to. The wedding night, which he'd thought was just part of a deal, had become the start of something greater, a connection he couldn't control and didn't want to let go of. Chapter 4. Love's Creation and the First Cracks. The days following the wedding passed in the penthouse by the Thames like a strange dream, a blend of the space's inherent coldness and the fresh warmth Clara Wren brought with her. The large glass walls still reflected the hazy lights from the frozen river, but now the room was no longer as empty as before. Clara, with her skill and affection, had begun turning it into a home. Though the changes were small, they were enough to make Julian Ashford feel something different stirring in his icy heart. She hung small candles along the windowsill, their soft golden light dancing on the glass, and placed dried flower bouquets in glass jars she'd found in a corner cabinet. Once she dropped a jar, the sound of shattering glass echoing across the marble floor. But she quickly picked up the pieces, laughing loudly. "Your place is cold as a freezer. I'm adding some warmth here, so bear with me even if I'm a bit clumsy." Julian watched her from the corner of the room, his cold gray eyes flickering with a rare smile, though he quickly hid it, turning away as if unwilling to admit she was changing him. In those days, they lived together in an odd rhythm. Julian still went to work at Evergreen Biotech, facing the pressure of the drug trial scandal, while Clara spent her time in the penthouse, making it a place where she could breathe. She wasn't good at cooking, but she tried baking. Charred pastries she laughed about as she presented them. "I'm not promising they're tasty, but if they're edible, I'm proud of myself." Julian, though he initially frowned, took a bite, and for the first time in his life he found himself genuinely laughing. A short laugh, but enough for Clara to cheer. "See? I made you laugh. I'm better than you think." Those moments, though small, slipped into his heart, gradually melting the ice he'd so carefully built. One evening, as snow fell heavily outside, Clara sat on the large sofa, legs tucked up, holding a mug of hot cocoa. The lights from the Thames shone through the glass, casting faint golden streaks across her face. Julian entered through the front door, his black suit jacket dusted with snow, his eyes weary after a long day of meetings with the board. He intended to head straight to his room, but Clara called him back, her voice warm. "Sit with me for a bit. I've got something to tell you." Julian paused, looking at her with cold gray eyes, but he didn't refuse. Something in her voice made him unable to walk away. He sat beside her, keeping a small distance, hands clasped as if to maintain a barrier. Clara took a sip of cocoa, then looked at him, her green eyes glimmering. "I want orphaned kids to be loved, to learn, like I once dreamed of someone hugging me in the snow." Her voice was gentle, but it carried a deep longing she rarely revealed. "At the orphanage, I always imagined someone would come, hug me and say, 'Clara, everything will be okay.' But no one ever did. I want those kids not to have to wait like I did." Julian stayed silent, his gaze fixed on her, and for the first time, he felt a small crack in his icy shell, a sympathy he didn't want to acknowledge. "I want to create a place for them, Wren's Wings, a home where they know they're not alone." Julian looked at her, his cold gray eyes now tinged with a spark of warmth. He wasn't used to dreams like this. His life was numbers, strategies, and power. But Clara's voice, the sincerity in every word she spoke, drew him into a world he'd never known. "Evergreen Biotech will fund it," he said, his voice low but firm. "We'll build Wren's Wings, a home for the kids." Clara looked up, eyes wide, then leapt from the sofa, hugging him tightly and spilling her cocoa onto the floor. "You're amazing," she exclaimed, ignoring the brown stain spreading on the marble. "You handle the big stuff. I'll love the kids. That makes us a team." Julian felt the warmth of her embrace, his heart beating faster, but he didn't push her away. He hugged her back gently, as if afraid to break something fragile. In the days that followed, they started the project. Julian secured funding from partners, while Clara deftly connected with the community through her warmth. Wren's Wings took shape, a small learning center in East London where orphaned kids could study and feel the love Clara had always wanted to give. But that happiness didn't last long. A shadow from Julian's past began to loom. Victor Klein, an old rival of Julian's in the biotech industry, didn't stop at spreading rumors about Evergreen's drugs. 2 years earlier, he'd lost a major deal to Julian, and his resentment had simmered ever since. When he learned of Julian's marriage to Clara and the launch of Wren's Wings, Victor saw a chance for revenge. One morning, while Julian was at work, Clara received an anonymous letter at the penthouse, a neatly folded piece of paper with scrawled handwriting. "Leave Julian, or Wren's Wings will burn. You don't belong in this world." Clara read it, her hands trembling, but she quickly stuffed the letter into her sweater pocket, not wanting Julian to worry. She told herself it was just a prank, but deep down a fear began to creep in, a fear that her love would harm him. Julian found the letter one evening when Clara left her sweater on the sofa. He opened it, read each word, and rage flared within him like a dark fire. "He dares to touch you?" he roared, his voice hoarse, his cold gray eyes now blazing with fury. Clara walked in, saw him holding the letter, and forced a smile. "It's fine. Just someone jealous. Don't worry." But Julian didn't listen. He hid his pursuit of Victor from her, contacting Evergreen's security team, determined to track down the culprit. He didn't tell Clara, not wanting her to be afraid, but his silence made her feel insecure. She began to think she was a burden, that her love was dragging him down. At the charity gala launching Wren's Wings in a luxurious Mayfair hotel, Clara stood amid a crowd of high society, people in expensive suits and evening gowns, their scrutinizing eyes sizing her up like an outsider. A middle-aged woman with her hair pinned high sneered, "You make coffee and dream of charity? You don't fit with Julian." Clara laughed loudly, her voice warm but sharp. "They just don't know love. I still make Mr. Ashford laugh every day." But as she turned away, Victor's letter haunted her. She feared they were right, that she didn't belong in this world, that she'd harmed Julian and Wren's Wings. That night, while Julian stayed late at the office dealing with Victor, Clara stood before the penthouse's large glass window, watching the thick snow fall outside. The letter trembled in her hand, and a tear fell, the first she'd shed since meeting him. She didn't want to leave him, but she feared her love would destroy everything. She wrote a note. "I'm leaving so the fire doesn't go out. Don't look for me." Then put on her coat and stepped out into the snowy night, her worn boots silently treading the thick snow. Julian returned to the penthouse at midnight, finding it empty. He called her name, his voice hoarse. "Clara?" There was no answer, just the note on the sofa. He read it, his hands shaking, and in a surge of desperation, he slammed his fist into the large glass, shattering a piece. Blood dripped from his hand onto the floor, but he didn't care. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You can't leave." He rushed outside, snow coating his suit jacket, his cold gray eyes now frantically searching for her. In his pocket was his only clue, a small scarf she'd once knitted for him, dropped on the street as she left. He clutched it tightly, blood from his hand staining the wool, and ran into the snow, determined to find the flame that had changed his life. Chapter 5. The Legacy of Love and Harmony. London, snow fell heavily, blanketing the city in a cold, yet beautiful shroud. Beneath Tower Bridge, the wind howled through the ancient steel pillars, carrying swirling snowflakes, and Clara Wren stood there, a small figure in the white expanse. She clutched an old knitted scarf, a gift she'd made for Julian in their early days together, unaware that it had slipped from her hand when she left the penthouse that night. Snow clung to her tangled blonde hair, her green eyes now brimming with tears, and she wept. Silent tears falling and melting into the snow at her feet. "I'm afraid my love will hurt you," she whispered, her voice breaking amid the wind, her trembling hands hugging herself. Victor Klein's threatening letter, the mocking words at the charity gala, and her self-doubt about not belonging in Julian's world had driven her from the penthouse. But now, standing here, lost and regretful, her heart weighed heavy with a love she couldn't extinguish. Julian Ashford raced through the snow, his black suit jacket coated in white, blood from his hand, the wound from the shattered glass in the penthouse, dripping red streaks onto the snow. He'd run through the streets near the Thames, his cold gray eyes now frantically searching, clutching Clara's knitted scarf like a final clue. When he saw her beneath the bridge, his heart seemed to stop. She stood there, small and fragile, yet still the flame that had transformed him. He ran to her, dropping to his knees before her, blood from his hand falling onto the snow, blending into faint red stains. "Clara," he said, his voice hoarse, "without you, I'm dead ice. Don't put out my fire." His gray eyes, for the first time in his life, glistened with tears, not from the cold, but from the fear of losing her. Clara looked at him, tears streaming harder, and she threw herself into his arms, holding him tightly as if afraid he'd vanish. "I came back because I love you too much," she sobbed, her voice breaking, her small hands gripping his coat, leaving snowy smudges on the black fabric. I didn't want to hurt you, but I couldn't stay away. I don't know what to do. Julian held her, his trembling hands stroking her wet hair, and he whispered, "You're everything. Don't leave me again." They stood there amid the snow beneath Tower Bridge, two hearts entwined in tears and warmth, and in that moment, all cracks vanished, leaving only love, stronger than the storm around them. They returned to the penthouse hand in hand, and from then on, they united to face the challenges ahead. Victor Klein, the man behind the threatening letter, didn't relent. He spread fiercer rumors about Evergreen's drugs, causing the company's stock to plummet further. Julian resolved to hold a major scientific conference at Excel London to disclose the data, proving the product's safety, and to launch Wren's Wings as a commitment to the community. Clara, though afraid, agreed to stand with him. "You handle the hard part," she said, her radiant smile returning. "I'll just stand there and make people laugh. We're a team, right?" The day of the conference arrived, XCL London ablaze with lights, hundreds of investors, reporters, and experts gathered in the vast hall. Julian took the stage, his cold gray eyes now steely and determined, presenting transparent data on the tissue regeneration drug. But as he finished, Victor Klein emerged from the front row, standing with a sinister smirk. "She's Ashford's burden," he shouted, pointing at Clara standing near the wings. "A coffee maker. She's dragging him and Evergreen into the abyss." The crowd buzzed, scrutinizing eyes turning to Clara, and Julian gripped the microphone, about to step down and confront him, but Clara was faster. She strode onto the stage, her simple white dress flowing lightly, her green eyes gleaming without a trace of fear. "Mr. Klein," she said, her voice warm but sharp as a blade, "I'm not great at arguing, but I'm good at loving, and I'll burn away your doubts right now." She took the microphone, looking straight at the audience, and shared, "I met Julian in the snow, and he's not just a CEO. He's the one who gave me a home, and together we built Wren's Wings so orphans don't have to wait in the cold like I once did. This is real data, and this is real love." She presented Julian's numbers in her own voice, warm, sincere, silencing the crowd, then sparking thunderous applause. Evergreen's stock soared on the live screen, and Wren's Wings received millions in pledges from moved investors. Victor was escorted out by police when evidence of his hiring hackers surfaced. Julian had quietly worked with the law to turn the tables. After the conference, they returned to the penthouse, more in sync than ever. Clara became pregnant with twins a few months later, laughing loudly as her belly grew. "These two are my fire. You've got to burn with me, okay?" Julian, now gentler, hugged her. "I'll burn for you, and for them." On a freezing winter day, as snow fell thickly outside, Clara went into labor. They rushed to St. Mary's Hospital, and in the delivery room, chaos erupted. Machines blared. One twin's heartbeat weakened, and Clara struggled to give birth. She gripped Julian's hand, tears streaming, her voice trembling. "If I don't make it, you have to love them. Don't let them grow up motherless like I did." Her green eyes blurred with pain and fear, but she still managed a faint smile. "I don't want them growing up in the cold." Julian, eyes red, held her hand tightly, feeling her warmth fading. He leaned down, singing "Silent Night," the song she'd sung at the hearth, his voice hoarse but filled with love. "Silent night, holy night. You're the fire you have to burn. I'm here." His singing rang out amid the chaotic beeping, like a prayer, and Clara smiled weakly, squeezing his hand. The doctors rushed in, opting for an emergency C-section, a race against time. After tense minutes, the cries of two baby boys echoed, Oliver and Theo, tiny, pink, and alive. Clara was saved, though exhausted, and she cradled them, smiling faintly. "I burned my all. Now you love them for me, okay?" Julian embraced all three, tears falling onto her cheek, and he whispered, "You're my everything." The family reunited in joyful tears, and from then on, they built a grand legacy. Wren's Wings flourished, establishing dozens of learning centers across the UK, helping thousands of orphans find the homes and love Clara had once dreamed of. Evergreen Biotech, under Julian's leadership, became a global titan, pioneering sustainable biotech, bringing health and hope to humanity. The penthouse by the Thames was no longer cold. It overflowed with Oliver and Theo's laughter, Clara's candles, and the love of a family that had overcome every trial. Chapter 6. Eternal Happiness. 40 years later, snow fell lightly over the London suburbs, where narrow cobblestone roads now shimmered under a fine white layer beneath the faint late-day sun. The home of Julian and Clara Ashford nestled amid fields of golden, dried grass, far from the bustling city center they once called home. It was a small wooden house with a sloped, snow-dusted roof and a white picket fence, not as luxurious as the penthouse by the Thames from years past, but brimming with warmth and memories. The garden Clara had planted decades ago bloomed vibrantly around the fence, clusters of yellow daisies, wild roses, and dried lavender standing resiliently through the winter, a testament to their enduring love. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the faint scent of burning wood into the cold air, and the sound of children's laughter echoed from the front yard, where their grandchildren played in the snow. Clara Wren, now Clara Ashford, sat on an old swing chair on the porch, a thick wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was now white, long and tousled as ever, but her green eyes still sparkled with an undimmed light, a small flame that time couldn't extinguish. At 65, she retained her radiant smile, though deep wrinkles marked her face, each one a story of 40 years of love and trials. Beside her was Julian Ashford, 72, his once dark brown hair now silver, his once fearsome coal gray eyes now gentle and deep, like a winter lake reflecting light. He sat close to her, his left hand holding hers under the blanket, his right cradling a mug of hot tea, steam rising to blend with the chilly air. They didn't speak much, simply sitting there, listening to the soft fall of snow on the roof and the wind rustling through the bare branches in the garden. 40 years had passed since that wild wedding night in the penthouse. The night Clara kissed him, melting the ice he'd so carefully built, pulling him into a world of fire and love he never thought he'd belong to. Since then, they'd faced everything together: the evergreen biotech scandal, Victor Klein's threats, the days Clara fled into the snow, and the life or death moment when she gave birth to their twins, Oliver and Theo. Their love wasn't just a personal tale. It had grown into a vast legacy, spreading across the world through Wren's Wings and Evergreen Biotech. Wren's Wings, the charity Clara dreamed of from her lonely orphanage days, had become a global network, with hundreds of learning centers across 5 continents, supporting millions of orphans with homes, education, and the love she'd once craved. Evergreen Biotech, led by Julian and later by their sons Oliver and Theo, had risen to become the world's leading force in regenerative medicine, pioneering sustainable biotech, bringing health and hope to billions, an empire built not just on profit, but on the human values Clara had instilled in him. On a peaceful winter afternoon like any other, Clara rested her head on Julian's shoulder, her voice warm with a hint of humor. "I've been burning you up for 40 years. Tired yet?" She laughed, a gentle sound that still echoed like the days she stood in the hearth, brewing coffee and teasing him amid a blizzard. Julian turned to her, his gray eyes now soft, and he smiled, a smile she'd taught him to wear from the very beginning. "Never tired," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're the fire I never want to put out." He leaned down, kissing her forehead, the warmth of his lips spreading across her wrinkled skin, and Clara closed her eyes, savoring the moment as if they were still the young couple in that penthouse long ago. The sound of tiny footsteps crunched on the snow-covered path, and a group of children, their grandchildren, ran up, cheeks flushed from the cold, hands clutching snowballs. "Grandpa! Grandma!" A 5-year-old girl with blonde hair like Clara's cheered. "Tell us a story. How you met?" The other kids gathered around the swing chair, eyes wide with curiosity, and Julian chuckled, a rare sound Clara had always cherished from the start. "All right," he said, setting his tea down, pulling the blanket over the legs of the children sitting on the ground. "But your grandma has to tell it with me. She's the one who started it all." Clara laughed heartily, sitting up straighter, her green eyes twinkling as she looked at the kids. "Yep, it was me, because your grandpa was stiff as a block of ice back then." She tilted her head, her voice warm with a touch of mischief. "Way back when, I worked in a little coffee shop, and he walked in, face all tense like he was heading to a shareholders meeting, telling me hurry up with his coffee. I dropped a spoon, nearly spilled coffee on his hand, but I laughed, and he didn't know what to do with me. The kids giggled and Julian cut in, his voice deep but full of affection. Your grandma kissed me until I melted in the snow. Love is a fire that never goes out, and she set me ablaze from that first night. Clara hugged his arm, continuing. We fought. I ran off, but he found me under a bridge in the snow, hands bleeding but still kneeling to beg me back. Then we had your parents, Oliver and Theo, and built Wren's Wings so kids like you wouldn't have to wait in the cold like I did. The children fell silent, eyes round, and a little boy asked, Were you scared? Julian looked at Clara, his gentle gray eyes locking with hers, and he said, Yes, but your grandma taught me that love is worth burning for. The kids cheered, running off to play in the snow again, their laughter echoing across the field. Clara leaned her head on Julian's shoulder, whispering, They're like us when we were young, always running, always loving. Julian squeezed her hand tighter, feeling the warmth from her frail fingers, and he whispered, I've been addicted to you since that first night, forever. They sat there, watching the snow fall gently, flakes glinting in the fading light, the space filled with peace, a peace they'd built over 40 years. The suburban house wasn't just where they lived, it was a symbol of their lasting love. Inside, photos on the walls chronicled their journey. Clara and Julian on their wedding day, Clara holding Oliver and Theo in the hospital, the opening of the first Wren's Wings Center, and trips around the world as Evergreen Biotech expanded. Oliver and Theo, now middle-aged men, had taken over the company, elevating it to new heights with sustainable regenerative tech, while honoring their parents' promise, dedicating a portion of profits to Wren's Wings. The charity was no longer just Clara's dream. It was a flame spreading worldwide, warming millions of orphans with education, love, and hope. As the sun set, painting the sky a soft orange, Julian stood, helping Clara inside. The kids followed, bringing the last snowballs, and the little house filled with laughter. Clara sat by the fireplace, watching Julian brew tea, a skill he'd learned from her over the years, and she smiled. You're still handsome as ever, though a bit slower now. Julian laughed, placing the mug in her hands. You're still my fire. Even with silver hair, you burn. They sat together hand in hand, listening to the fire crackle, while outside snow continued to fall, blanketing the small house. Their love, from that wild night in the penthouse decades ago, had become an eternal legacy, warming the world. Oliver and Theo, their grandchildren and millions of children through Wren's Wings, bore witness to that flame, a fire that never died, no matter how much time passed. Julian looked at Clara, his gentle gray eyes embracing her, and he knew 40 years wasn't an end, but the beginning of an eternity they'd walk together. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of Soul Stories channel. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life.